Hello everybody and welcome to another YouTube video. So in today's video, I am going to be showing you how to build a personal dashboard, which is going to allow you to track your progress towards something like 100 days of code and view all of your GitHub statistics. Now I'm just going to give you kind of the foundation and then you guys can extend this and build on it as you please. But since it's pretty difficult for me to explain what this is without showing you, let me show you a demonstration of what we're going to be building. So this is kind of going to act as an internal tool, a dashboard for yourself. And of course, you can customize it. This is just what I've come up with so far. So you can see we have a commit history in the top left. We have all of our repositories from GitHub showing here, along with the description, the branch, the primary language. And then I have an 100 days of code tracker. Now, I know a lot of you guys do this where you participate in 100 days of code, and I see people posting tweets about it and trying to kind of keep track of their progress. So I figured this would be a cool thing to showcase how you can come up with a very simple form here where you can implement the day, the date, maybe the repository that you used, put a resource URL, and then add a bunch of notes about maybe what you accomplished for this day of 100 days of code. Then you could click log, and what would happen is you would log this down here in kind of, I guess, your logs. And of course, this is just showing you a very rough look at what it is that you typed in. You could display this in a different format, just trying to show you that it's very easy to actually kind of make a log with the tool we're going to be using here, which I'll get to in a second. Anyways, let's just go to the commit history. I'm going to type in my username, which is techwithtim. If I type it correctly, I spelt it wrong, then you'll see it'll give me all of my history here as a bar chart. So there's all kinds of stuff we can do with this software. I'm going to talk about a lot of it in this video, but this is kind of going to be the final project, building this nice personal dashboard, shows you your commit history or any user's commit history for that matter, shows you all of your repositories and gives you a way to actually track your progress. Of course, you can do something other than 100 days of code. I'm going to show you how to add something into a database and have this stored persistently. So with that said, let me head over to another website and I'll talk to you about the tool we're actually going to be using to build this project. All right, so I'm here on ReTool.com. Now, ReTool is the sponsor of this video, but they're also the platform that we're going to be using to build this internal dashboard. Now, ReTool is an awesome platform. It is built for developers, but it's also low code. So what it lets you do is very rapidly build internal applications and aggregate a ton of data sources together. So say you have data from a REST API, a few SQL databases, maybe a MongoDB database, maybe you have your own database that you're creating, whatever it may be, you can aggregate all of that in one location, have some preset queries that you want to run on this data, and then use those queries to update your dashboard. So maybe you have a few different tables, some charts, whatever it's going to be. ReTool will automatically refresh those whenever you rerun the queries, and it's really awesome to just quickly build an internal tool and kind of visualize data. In fact, the application that I built here took me about an hour when I was kind of tinkering and still learning the platform. And so I'm going to show you how to build it here even quicker. And we are messing with multiple databases, multiple data sources, and showing a bunch of different components. Now, ReTool also has a graphical user interface that allows you to drag components directly onto the screen, use JavaScript code to dynamically render what's inside of those components. It's very cool. And anyways, I'll show you more about it when we actually get into the platform. Now, ReTool is free. You can try it for free by going to the link in the description and signing up for an account. And everything I do in this video is going to be from a free trial account. So I'm not showing you any features that you won't directly have access to. Now, even once your free trial ends, if you've already built the application, you can still view it, use it as you normally would. It's like a functioning application. It's hosted online for you for free. And yeah, that's pretty much all I need to talk about for ReTool. So let's sign into an account. I'm going to assume you guys have done that at this point in time, and then we'll create a new project and we'll start building out this application. All right, so I've just set up a fresh ReTool account, and now I've been brought to this page. Now, this is so we can set up our first application, and you can see it's asking me to connect a database or an API. Now, there's a ton of different options here. We are going to set up a Postgres database later on, but for now, I want to do the GitHub integration or the GitHub API because that's how we're going to retrieve the different repositories that we have, as well as our contribution history. So I'm going to click on GitHub here, and I'm just going to give this a name. I'll just say GitHub, and then I'll go with tech with Tim because that's my username. Now, for the username, I'm going to do this, and then we need a personal access token. Now, you can click on this link and it will allow you to generate a token. I already have one, so I will insert one here, test my connection, and then create this resource. I'm going to assume you guys can get through this step. Again, just read this kind of thing here to make a personal access token, paste it in, and then you should be good to go. All right, so I've just inserted my personal access token, and now the GitHub resource is set up. Now you're going to see that it brings you through a tutorial. Feel free to go through this. It's probably helpful. I've already looked at how to do this though, so I'm just going to skip the tutorial for now. So let's just kind of do a quick platform overview and then we'll start building the application. So right down here, you have kind of your query view. Now this is where you can view all of your different resources and you can set up queries that can run whenever you want. So for example, we just have a SQL query here that's going to select everything from a database. This is just a database that's provided to you to do some testing operations. It's called onboarding DB. Now we're not going to use that, but you can see we have GitHub Tech with Tim. That's our GitHub resource. And now inside of here, I can write GraphQL if I want and actually do queries. If you're unfamiliar with GraphQL, you're going to have to find a tutorial on that. I'm not really going to explain it a ton in this video, but I will show you a few queries that you can run that will give you repository information, contribution information, all that type of stuff. Anyways, though, you select your resource, you can choose when you want this query to run, and then you can actually have the query in here. You can put variables, headers, and then transformers and event handlers. These are really cool because, for example, if the query fails, you can show like an error message on the screen to the user. All kinds of other stuff you can do. And then of course you save as many queries as you want here, and you can have them triggered when other queries run and do all kinds of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to close that for now. That's kind of the query view. We'll get to that in a second. On the right-hand side, we have, I guess, the component view. And this is where you're actually able to view all of the components that you can just drag right onto the user interface. So I can just take a table and just put it here, and then I could select the data that I want. Here it's saying query1.data. So that would be this. Now, currently, we don't actually have anything in query 1. I also haven't saved query 1, and so that's why it's not updated. Anyways, I'm going to delete the table. I just wanted to showcase that to you. Okay, come on, delete. Let's delete it like that. All right. Continuing, we have our inspect. So if I click on an element like this, I can view all of the different properties of it. You know, I can change the layout of the menu, change the styles. I can also change the name of it because I can access this in JavaScript code when I'm actually, I guess, dynamically showing stuff on the screen. All right, so I think that's pretty much it for the platform overview. Very simple and intuitive to use. I'll also mention you can preview the app here and you can share this app with other people by clicking on the share button. For now, though, what I want to do is just modify the name of this app, and I'll just call this Personal Dashboard for now. Feel free to name it whatever you want. All right, so my screen just updated. Now we are on the Personal Dashboard project, and the first thing I want to do is just set up a few interface components, and then we'll actually link some data to them, and you can see how it kind of updates in live time. So I'm going to drag in a text input here from the right-hand side, and this is going to be to enter the GitHub username that you want to view the commit history for. So for the placeholder here, I'm going to call this, or I'm going to make this enter and then GitHub like that, and then username. For the label, I'm actually going to hide the label. I don't want any label here. I'm going to show the clear button. That's fine. And then for the prefix icon, let's go with a user. So let's click user like this, and we'll just do that little user icon. Looks good to me. Other than that, I want kind of a chart so that I can actually view the GitHub history, right? So let's go with chart. Let's drag this in. I'll make this a little bit bigger, and then we can extend this so it just lines up with the chart. Now we will write the content of the chart in a second, but for now I just want to put that in. And for the title of the chart, I should be able to find this somewhere. Bar chart, data source, okay. Title, here we are. Let's go with commit history like that. Perfect, that's our title, and we'll leave it as a bar chart for now. Now, I will change the name to just be commit history, and I'm also going to change the name of this input field here to be GitHub, and then username, because we're going to reference this in our code. Perfect, okay, so now we have our input and we have our chart. The next thing I'm going to do is insert a table, and this table is going to show all of our GitHub repositories. So right now you can see the data is from query1.data. We'll change that in a minute, but let's put some text above this, and I'll show you that with the text, it's really cool. You can actually directly just use Markdown inside of this text. So if I go here, I can select Markdown or plain text. With Markdown, what I can do is something like this. I can do, let's go with 3 pound signs for heading 3, and then let's make this repositories. Did I spell that right? Repositories? I think I did. Okay, now if I want this to be center, let's just lay that out in the center. I'm going to make that go down just so it lines up a bit with that field. And for now, that looks good to me. Perfect. Now let's just change the name of this table and let's make this repo table. Great. Okay, so there we go. We have kind of the first part of our UI. So let's deal with this part right now, and then we'll work with the 100 days of code tracker. Okay, so I want to display some data in the commit history. And this data is going to be based on whatever I type in here, right? So if I type tech with Tim, then I want to display tech with Tim's commit history. So what I need to do is run a query on my GitHub resource here, and that's going to give me all of the commit history for a specific user. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just change the name of this query. So let's just click rename here, and let's make this get commit like this, and then data. Now, before I even do the query, I'll show you that if we want to use the data from this query in commit history, what we can do is just go to data source here and just put the name of the query. So get commit.data. You can see the autocomplete showing up. And the reason why I'm putting this inside of 2 curly braces is because this is a JavaScript code. So whenever you want to embed JavaScript code, you just do it inside of 2 curly braces. And you can see it's actually going to give me whatever the return data is right here. And I can view it underneath. And if I want to pop this out, I just click this button, and then this is a little bit larger so I can read this easier. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the query and kind of how you come up with it. I'm just going to paste it in from my other screen because it will be pretty complicated if I explained all of these queries. So I'm just going to paste in this query. I'll pop this up so you guys can read this a little bit easier. We have query, user. The login is going to be text input1.value. Now, this is actually the incorrect name. I need to reference this field right here, which is the GitHub username. So I'm going to put GitHub username like that. And now whatever they type in this field is going to be passed as the login, and the login is just the username of the user. Now I need to make sure I do .value to actually get the text value. And what I'm looking for here is the name, the contributions collection, contribution calendar, colors, total contributions, weeks, and then all of this other data. Again, I can't necessarily explain how you come up with this query because you have to look at the GitHub API for that, but this is going to give us every single day, or sorry, every single week, and how many commits we had during each day of that week. So we'll be able to kind of parse through this data here and then access what it is that we want, which is going to be the number of commits per day, which will display in this chart as a bar chart. So anyways, I'll click done here. And now what I can do is I can save and run this query. So let's do that. And if I go here, notice it gives me that my name is Tim Rasika, right? It shows me the different colors, gives me all of my weeks. For each week, we have the contribution days. Let me make this a bit larger so we can read this. All right, so I've made this a bit larger, and we can see that when we ran this query, we're going to get weeks. Now, weeks will be a list. All of the elements in this list are going to be JSON objects, and they're going to have the contribution days key, I guess, and that's going to allow us to access other JSON objects that have a color and the number of contributions that we did in that specific day. So you can see I haven't done too many contributions this year. Regardless though, if we scroll through here, we will see all of the different contributions that I have for the entire year. And then it also gives us the color that would have shown up on kind of like the GitHub colored commit history bar chart, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so that is that query. So now that we've ran this query, we can access the data of this query from anywhere. Now, the format of this data is not going to be in the correct format for us to actually graph it directly, so we'll have to transform it slightly, but I'll show you how to do that. So for now, when I have getCommit.data.data, notice it's not showing anything in here. The reason it's not showing anything is, again, because the format of this data is kind of incorrect to be graphed. So what I'm going to do now is actually add a JavaScript transformer. And what this is going to allow me to do is view the return value of that query and transform that data using JavaScript into a format that's going to be easier for me to graph. So essentially what I want to do here in this transformer is I want to take the data from this query and I want to flatten all of the weeks so that I have each individual day as one element in an array. Because what I want to do here when I'm graphing this is I want to use the date of each of my days as the x-axis and the number of contributions on that day as the y-axis. So I need to flatten these into individual elements so that I can choose the x and y axis. Anyways, let me show you how we do that. So I'm going to rename this transformer to flatten commit data. And then what I'll do here is the following. I'll say return, and then to access my query, I'm going to put inside of curly braces the get commit data like that. Now I want the data, so I'm going to do .data. Now the reason I'm doing .data is because, let's save this first. If we look here, we have data that's going to be returned as a key. Then we have user, and then we're going to have contribution collection, then calendar, then weeks, then contribution days, so on and so forth. So I'll show you how we get all of that, but that's why I'm doing .data. And if I hover this, you can see it actually shows me that the other key is user. So now I'm going to access .user. Then after user, I want contribution collection, then contribution calendar, then .weeks. Now, since .weeks is going to be a list, as it's showing me right here, I need to map all of the values in these weeks to a function that's going to give me all of the days in those weeks. So I'm going to put after the curly braces here, .map, and then inside of parentheses, I'll put week because I'm mapping all of my weeks to a week. And then what I'm going to do is return from here the week dot, and then this is going to be the contribution days. Okay, I think that is good. Let me just save this and now go check this data. So we can see, yeah, we have contribution days. So let's go to flatten commit data. Let's preview this. And this is what it's returning. So let's make this a bit larger. So we now have a bunch of lists inside of a list. However, I want all of these lists to be flattened. So what I'm going to do is do .flat and then 1. And now if I save this and I preview it, notice that each element now is going to be an individual day. So I have all of my different days, and then I have each day, which is a color, contribution count, date, and weekday. Hopefully that makes sense, but I'm just going to use the date and the contribution count again for my X and Y axis. Perfect. So now we have this transformer. So what I can do is go to my commit history, and I can change the data here to, rather than get commit data, to be the return value of my transformer. So I'm going to say flatten commit data dot and then dot value. And also, just in case you're confused on how to write this, you can click on this little button right here to learn more about how to write JS transformers. Anyways, I have the value now, but the issue is I'm not seeing the graph. And the reason why I'm not seeing the graph is because if we look at value, we just have a bunch of JSON objects. That's not good enough to actually graph this. I need to manually specify the X and the Y axis, so I can do that from Plotly. So if I go to Plotly here, what I can actually do inside of here is I can write a specification for this graph. Now, I'm not going to necessarily explain Plotly. Again, you can click here to read more about Plotly, but I will show you how we specify the X and Y axis values, as well as the name of the graph, the type of the graph, that type of stuff. So for the type of this graph, I want this to be a bar graph. So I'll just specify bar like that. And then for the X axis, I'm going to say X, and I'm going to reference the flatten commit data dot, and then this is going to be value. And then I need to map every single one of these values here, which is going to be my individual days, to the contribution, or sorry, to the date, because that's going to be my X axis. So I'm going to say dot map, and then inside of here, we will take in, I guess, a day, and we will map this to day, and then this is going to be dot date like that. So now we should have all of the dates on our X axis, but I of course need to do the Y axis. So let's go here and let's do Y. So we're going to go Y, and then rather than date, this is going to be contribution like that, and then count. Okay, let's hit done. And now if I put in a name, hopefully this should actually start graphing. All right, so I realized I made a quick mistake here. I accidentally added the curly braces when I don't need to do that, because I'm just going to directly have the return value here from this map function. So let me just remove these, and now we should see that's actually showing up. Okay, awesome. Now we're actually getting the graph. I was looking at that like, why is this not working? Now, one thing we see here is that we have this trace 0 for kind of the legend of what these blue bars are. So what I'm going to do is just put something in here that says a name, and the name is just going to be commits. And then that will tell us, if I spell commits correctly, what the legend should be for this. All right, hopefully that makes sense. There's a ton of other things you can add to this Plotly, I guess, JSON specification. Again, you can read those from this link right here. This is the basics. You pass all of the values for X and all of the values for Y, and then it should automatically plot it for you. As we can see, it's showing up with my commit history. Now, if we put someone else's commit history in, this will work as well. I don't know anyone else's username off the top of my head. I know mine though, Tech with Tim. And if you guys do this, you put in my username, you will see my commits, because those are publicly available. You won't see any commits to private repositories, but any of my public commits you can see right here. That's why I have so few of them. Anyways, now what we can do is update this repository table, because I've showed you how we can actually write the query, how we save the query, how we have the transformer. So now let's delete query 1 and let's make a new one here that's going to give us all of the repositories that we have in our account. So I'm going to go for new query. I'm going to go resource query. And yes, we're going to use GitHub again. We'll run query automatically when inputs change. Perfect. So that means like when we change this here, it's going to automatically update the query. Although this is not going to be for this table, which I'll show you in a second. So what I'm going to do is paste in a query. I just have to find it from my other screen here. So let's grab the query and let's paste this in. Okay, so this is the query to get all of the data about your repositories. This will just give you the public repositories, I believe. It may give you the private ones, but I think it's just your public repositories. And you'll see that you'll get all the information like name, description, the default branch, the primary language, etc. So let's rename this query after I save it. So let's rename this to say get repo info, like that. Again, you guys can pause the video and type this out. I'm not going to explain the query. And now if I preview this, you're going to see that we will get all of the data for my repos. So we'll get data, we'll get viewer, repositories, total count, then it gives me the nodes, and every single node is going to have the information about the repository. So I have Pygame tutorials, golf game, side scroller game, etc. So now what I want to do is use that data inside of this table. So to do that, I'm going to change from query1.data to be get repo info.data. And it says invalid value, try passing in an array of objects or the result of a SQL query with something like query1.data. Now, if I actually look at .data, you can see that we're getting .viewer, .repositories, etc. So what I need to do here is I just need to access the specific key that I want to display, which in this case is going to be repositories and then nodes. So let's go data, dot, and then viewer, dot, and then repositories, dot, and then nodes. And now you can see it's going to show me all of this information, right? The name, the default branch, and the primary language. However, this doesn't look very attractive. It's kind of all, like JSONified. We have like name, master, name, Python. So what I can do is I can specify for each column what I actually want to display by going to the columns and then having a specific mapped value for this column. So I'm going to say self. This is inside of, actually the name column can stay the same. Sorry, I don't want to do name. Let's do, let's go here. Let's do default branch ref. And for here, we will just say self dot and then name. Now, when I do that, it's going to access the name attribute on the JSON object representing this column. And so I just get the actual name rather than all that other stuff. So like the key beforehand. Okay, now let's go to primary language. So I keep clicking out of this. Let's go primary language and same thing here. We're just going to say self dot, and then this is going to be name. And now it should just show us Python. Perfect. And then I also want to view the description as one of the columns, although for some reason it's not showing up. So let's see if we can enable that. If I go to description, let me just hide that and show that. And then there we go. We can see the description. Now, if I want to resize these, I can just kind of move them around. So that's what I'll do here. And that looks good to me. So that's as simple as it is to display your repositories. Now, we could change like the cosmetics of this if we want. You can see I can click on columns and sort them by name and whatnot. But let me click back on this table and let's go and have compact mode. Now, when I do compact mode, it's going to show me a bunch in the table, which is kind of what I want here. And then I'll have less pages to click through. So I'm just going to select that. And then you can toggle the download button, loading state, refresh button, all that type of stuff. Perfect. Now let's just look at this query again, because I didn't really explain this at all. If I go to get repo info, that's not what I want to look at. I want to look at this right here. Notice how I have affiliations owner. Now what this is doing is specifying that you can only view the data of the owner of the GitHub account that's currently linked. So when you actually connected the GitHub API, you would have done some authentication, right? By putting in your personal access token. Now that means that you are the owner of this GitHub account. And so when I put owner, that's what it's showing you. It's showing you all of the repositories for the owner. So me changing this here isn't going to modify this, and I can't look up the repositories of everyone else, at least not using this query. So in this case, I'm just using owner, and it's showing me my current repositories, which is what I want to see. Now I also have first being 100, so it's only going to show me the first 100 repositories. If you wanted more, you could put say 200, or if you wanted less, maybe go with like 50, whatever, right? So I'm just going to go with 100 for right now. Anyways, that's kind of how the query works. Again, don't really want to get too much into the GraphQL. You can look at the GitHub API to see how these work, just showing you a few of them kind of for example purposes. Okay, So now that we have that, let's start building the form that's going to allow us to log information about 100 days of code. So to build this component, I'm going to start by dragging in a container. Now this container is just going to hold everything or all of our components for kind of the form. And for the form, what I want people to enter is the day, the date, the repository that they used. If they used any repository, that will be optional. And then any resource URL they want to store, and then any notes, right? So you saw what it looks like in the demo, but that's kind of the information we want. And then there'll be a button that says log. And when you click that, it will add that information to the database, assuming it's not conflicting with any other data. So let's just start dragging in some components here. For the date, I'm going to have, for the day, I'm going to have a number input. So let's drag this guy in. We can make it pretty small. Then what else do we want? We're going to want the date. So let's see if we can find a date input here. Perfect. There's one right here. So let's go with date. I don't really care about the time, so we can just make it date. And then we want to have the repository. So we need like a select or like a drop down. Yeah, I think select is fine. We can go with select like that. Yep. Okay, awesome. And then we also want to have a URL. So we'll put a URL like that. Okay, so let's start styling these and make them look a little bit better. First, this guy can be a little bit larger. So let's drag that over. Got to move this over now too. Okay, label will go in here. Nice. Okay, so for this one, let's call this the day input. Let's spell input correctly. Let's make the default value 1 because day 0 doesn't make too much sense. We don't really need enter value. I mean, we could say enter day if we want. And for the minimum, let's make it 1. And for the maximum, we don't really need a maximum because I guess you theoretically could go over 100 days. Now for the label, I'm just going to say day and then number like that. All right, so that's good for day. Now for the date, let's just add the name here of date. Let's make this date input like that. And then new date is fine. And the default value will just be the current date, which is great. Okay, now for this one here, we want to have repository. So I'm going to say select a repo like that. And then for the label, we will say repository. And what we want is we want a list of all of our repositories. Now, thankfully, we already have a query that gives us all of the repositories. So let's actually use the list of all of the repository names here as our options for the dropdown. So if I go back here, I can see that how I get this is get repo info.data.viewer.repositories.nodes. So now what I want to do is just map every single node to the name of the repositories. So that's what we'll do. So let's go here. Let's go to values. And for values, this is going to be get repo info.data.viewer.repositories.nodes.map. And then we'll map a repo to the repo. Oops, typed that in incorrectly. Okay, again, to the repo.name. Okay, so that should be good. Now we have all that. Now for the labels, I'm going to paste the exact same thing because theoretically you could have different labels than values. And that means when you click on a value or you click on a label, sorry, it would associate with the value. In this case, I just want them to be the same thing. You can see if I highlight over this here, we're getting all of the names of our different repositories. Perfect. Okay, so now if I click on this, we can see that we have all of our repositories showing up in here. I can select one. Awesome, looks good. Now, one thing I want to do is make it so that the label and the input field are closer together. Now, I forget exactly how to do that, but I think I can do something like specify the width of my label. Yes, that's right here. So let's make the label width just something like 20 so that we have a larger kind of field here for our input. Now, we're going to do the same thing with URL. So we're going to call this the URL input. Okay. And then for the label width, can I find that somewhere? Okay, that's right here. Let's make that 20. And instead of retool.com, actually we can leave retool.com. And URL, let's name this instead. Oh, no, pattern will be URL. Okay, that's fine. But for the label, where is the label? Here it is. I want this to be resource URL. Perfect. Okay, so that's kind of the top of our container. Now we can set the title of this container. We don't really need to name it anything. For the title, I will say 100 days of code tracker. That's fine. We want to center this, so let's put it in the center. And then if we want to make it larger, just remove one of those, and there we go. Okay, so now we want some notes or something. So let's see if I can find, maybe not a note, maybe this is going to be like text input. Okay, rich text editor. That's what I want to drag in here. So let's try to get this inside of the component. Okay, there we go. And now let's just make this a lot larger. And you can see that we have all the formatting options here too, right? So we're able to actually bold, italicize, underscore, or underline, whatever, right? Let's make that even larger. And now we just want a button at the bottom. Let's call this, though, notes input. And we want a button, and this button will let us log. So let's put the button right. If I could get this in, it's a little bit tricky to get it in the component here. Okay, I successfully placed the button at the bottom of the component. Now let's just resize this a little bit. And for the text on the button, let's call this log. And then we can just call this log button like that. All right, so now what I want to do is actually utilize a SQL database to store the information in here when I hit this log button. So I'm going to need to make a new query here to actually create the new database table. So I'm going to make a new resource query. This is going to use the ManageDB. This is an internal database that you have access to and that you can create new tables with. ManageDB, PostgreSQL. And then from here, I'm just going to, again, copy in a query. Feel free to pause the video and paste this if you want. That's going to create a table called days of code. That's going to have an ID key, a day key, a date time, a repo, a resource URL, and notes, which will be text. Now, I'm not going to explain SQL. Again, you can read all kinds of tutorials about SQL online, but essentially it will create this table if it does not exist, and then it will have all of these keys inside of it. So I can just run this query. It should just create the table for me. I'm not going to get any data back. Now that the table exists, I'll be able to actually add data to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is add or rename this query. Let's make this create table. And now let's make a query that can just give us all of the data from the table and insert data into the table. So actually, it probably makes sense to do the insert first. So let's make a new resource query. Let's call this insert log. And then again, I'm going to paste something in here, and I will explain how this works. So I'm going to say insert into days of code, and I'm going to put all of the columns that I want to insert values for. So in this case, day, date time, repo, resource URL, and notes. And then the values I'm going to modify here to be equal to the corresponding fields that I have. So for the first value, which is my day, I want this to be, let's go with day input and then dot value. Okay, for the next value, I need to put inside of curly braces because I'm accessing variables here. I want the date. So I'm going to go with the date input dot value. Okay, and then for the repo, I'm going to go with the repo input, or what did I call this? Select one. I got to rename this. Let's call this repo input. Okay. So now we're going to make this the repo input dot value. And you can probably guess what we're going to do for the next one. We're going to do the resource URL. What did I call this? This is the URL and input spelled incorrectly. So let's fix that name. Okay. So let's go with the URL and then input dot value. And then finally, after this, we want the notes. So I'm going to go with the note input dot value. Okay, so there we go. Now we have all of the information that would have been typed into this form. So what happens is we're now going to need to trigger this query whenever we hit the log button, which I will show you in a second. However, we're not really going to know if this works yet until we actually are able to display the data. So now let's make a table that can display the data from another query that we're going to write, which will give us essentially all of the rows from this new table that we made. So I'm going to go to insert. Let's go with table. Okay. We'll add a heading for it later, but for now, I just want the data. And for the data in this table, I'm going to delete all of this, and we will make it equal to a query that we're going to create now. So I'm going to make a new query, and let's call this query get logs. And we're just going to say select asterisks from, and then 100. Again, it's not going to be 100, it's going to be days of code. Okay. So let's actually preview this query. We're going to see that we get ID, day, date time, repo, resource URL, and notes, because those are all of the columns that we have, but we currently have no data in here, so we're not getting any rows. Okay. If I go to create table, I'll just mention to you that the name of the table is days of code. So that's why I'm using days of code when I'm selecting from the table. Same with inserting, I'm inserting into days of code. Okay, so let's go to get logs here. This is the query that we want to now run, or we want to use for this table. So for this table here, I'm going to say get logs dot, and then it's either data or values. Okay, data is good. You can see all of our columns are showing up. Now, what we want to do is make it so when we hit the log button, we actually call the insert log query, and then we run that query and insert the data. So let's go to the log button, and let's go to our event handlers. Now let's make a new event. The event is on click. The action is trigger query, but we could do a bunch of other things like confetti as well. I'm going to show you that in a second, actually, because the confetti is really cool. But now for the query, it's going to be insert log, and that's actually all we need to do. We just run the insert log query. It already has that there for us. Perfect. Now we can make another event handler. So I'm going to go event handler. And if I wanted to, I can make it so confetti is going to go on the screen when we click this. So I could go confetti or export data or anything else. However, I only want to show confetti if this is successful. So I'm going to show you how we can do that. It's not going to be from here. Anyways, now let's actually insert some data and let's see if this works. So for a repository, let me select Kivy. Let's just go https:// techwithtim.net. Okay, for the text, I will go with hello world because this is day one. And then let's hit log. Okay, so it looks like that happened successfully, but notice this table didn't update. Now, the reason this table didn't update is because we haven't reran the get logs query. So it's only going to show us what this query is displaying, and we haven't reran it. So I need to manually run this to update it, or we can actually have it so this query gets triggered when the insert log query is finished, which I'll show you how to do in a second. For now, though, let me just refresh, which is going to rerun the query. So I did that, and now we can see we have ID 1, day 1, date time, repo, resource URL, and notes, and it's going to give it to us in HTML. Sorry. Perfect. Okay, so that is showing up. That is working. Now, one thing I do want to add is an ability to delete this. I'll do that last, though, because that's pretty easy. For now, though, I want to make it so when we hit the log button and we run the insert log query, if this is successful, we update this table automatically. We don't have to hit refresh. So to do that, I'm going to add an event handler to this query, which is something you can do, which is really cool. And I'm going to say on success, trigger query. And the query I want to trigger is get logs. So now that query will be reran and the table will automatically be updated whenever we add an item in. So let's test this. Let's make the day 2. Let's increment the date to the 16th. We can change the repo here. Hello world 2. All right, so let's hit the log button. And now notice when I do this, it automatically updates the table for us and adds this new entry. Awesome. Okay, so now what I will do is make it so confetti shows up when this is successful. So to do that, I can go to the insert log and I can add a new event handler. And on success, I can simply put confetti. Awesome. And that means whenever I hit log and it's successful, confetti will show up on the screen. I can also add another event handler and say on failure, then what I want to do is not run a query, but I actually want to show a notification. So I'm going to say show notification. I'm going to say failure like that. And we'll go failed to create log. Okay. And then let's go for type. Let's go with error. Duration, we'll just leave it at the default of 4.5, and that looks good to me. Okay, so let's save, and I'll show you actually how we can do a failure. If I try to add a day that already exists, because of a constraint I have in the database, this will fail. So if I hit log now, notice we get failure, failed to create log, right? Because this day already exists. Now, if I make this day 3 and I log, then we get confetti showing up on the screen. Awesome. Okay, so that is now updating the table. We're able to create the logs. Let's now see how we can delete the logs. So to delete the logs, I want to add a new column in here that says actions or something like that, and then have a little button that says delete. And when I hit delete, I'm going to run another query that's going to delete this from the table. So we can make that query first. Let's go new, resource query. Let's say delete log. And then let me reference my cheat sheet here, although this is pretty straightforward to write. We're going to say delete from, this is going to be days of code. I could put capitals, but lowercase is fine. And then I'm going to say where day is equal to, and then this is going to be, what's this table name? Let's call this logs table. Okay, so let's go logs table like that, dot selected row dot ID. Actually, is ID gonna work? Yes, I think ID will work. I think that's fine. Okay, so logs table dot selected row, and then sorry, this is gonna be dot data dot ID, and that should give me the correct ID. Perfect. Now notice if I select, say, this here, and I go to ID, it's showing me 4, so it's gonna delete the item with ID equal to that, which actually means I need to change this, sorry, to be where ID equals this, because I was gonna do day, but I changed my mind, and now we're gonna do ID. All right, so all this is going to do is delete whatever the row is that we are on. However, we're only going to trigger this query when we hit the delete button on one of these rows. So let's now add a delete button. So to do that, I need to add another column. So if I'm in this table, let's go custom column. Let's call this actions, okay? Column type will be, can I do like a button? Do they have a button here? Looks like there might be. Let me look here. Okay, button, awesome. So we can do button. The value of the button, we can just say delete. That's fine for now. And then on click of the button, we want to run a query. The query we want to run is delete log. Perfect. That's all we need to do. So now when I hit the delete button, let's test it out. It should just delete this item, and it did actually delete it. So if I refresh here, you can see it's going to go away. The issue is, again, we aren't manually calling the query to automatically refresh the table. So we need to do that in the delete query event handlers. So now when I go to, sorry, not delete query, delete log. When I go to delete log, on success, I'm going to trigger a query, and this query is going to be get logs like that. So now when we hit delete, it should automatically update the table. Now let's add another event handler though to show confetti. So let's go confetti on success, nice. And then one more for an error. Let's go event failure, and let's go show notification. We'll do failure like that, and then we'll say could not delete log, and type will be error. Perfect. Okay. So let's try to add another log. We can add day 3, sure. Let's log that. Okay, it shows up. The day is 3, ID is 5, okay. Let's try to delete this one, and automatically refreshes. Awesome. So with that said, we're pretty much done. The last thing I'll do is just add a title here above this, just so this is a little bit cleaner. So let's give some space. Let's insert some text. Okay, we want it to go about right here. This text will be in Markdown, and we'll go with 3 headers, and we will say, I guess, days of code logs, and we might as well just put 100 days. Okay, 100 days of code logs, nice. Now I want this to be centered, so let's center that, and that looks good to me. Awesome, so now we have completed this app, and if we want to preview it, we can go to preview. And let's see how it looks. Okay, so that looks a lot better than in our kind of UI earlier. So now what I can do is type in username. So let's go with Tech with Tim. It's showing all of this, and then we'll be able to see all of our data and create logs. Awesome. All right, so that is going to wrap up this application. We also have a header that we could have modified, but I'm not going to modify that for right now or really worry too much about the styling. If you guys would like to view the code for this application, I will leave a link to it in the description. So you can just copy and paste anything you like, and you can actually mess around with this app and view it kind of in the testing mode. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. One more massive thanks to ReTool for sponsoring this video, and I will see you in another one.